If you have said to yourself, I should write that, or if someone has said to you, you should write that, then I'm talking to you because you need to write. And that's why you're tuned in to yWrite. Hi, welcome to yWrite. I'm your host, Angela Grout, and thanks for tuning in. You know, this is a show filled with conversations that I have with writers about their writing process to help you write. You know, writing begins many different ways for different people. Sometimes it's just make a list, write down a list of ideas. Other times it might actually be like a prompt or a memory sparks a story that you want to start writing. And for some people, it's just random thoughts pop into their head and they just scribble them on little pieces of paper or even dictate them into their phone. Whatever the process is to start the story, I will promise you that if you don't write the story, it's going to continue to come back to you. So when you sit down to write the story, then something magical happens. You start to see your thoughts on paper and you start to see a story evolve that you need to tell because you're the only one who can tell that story. And today I have my friend and fellow author, Anna Bozena Bowen here. And Anna Bozena Bowen is a writer. She's an author of a multi-award-winning novel called Hattie. Hattie has won over 12 awards. 12 awards. She is a poet. She began as a poet, and most recently was published in the Compass Roads book called Poems About the Pioneer Valley. She's a retired nurse. Her intuitive and spiritual approach to life deeply influences her writing. In May, she graduated with an MFA in creative nonfiction from Bay Path University, which just happened, like right now. Mm-hmm. Much of her writing focuses on the multidimensional aspects of our human and spiritual lives. Her creative spirit is nourished by deep, heartfelt conversations and her connection to the universe. Soul collage, her love of cooking, and traveling to Napa Valley and Maui are just a few of the things she loves to do. She lives here in Western Massachusetts, where she shares her life with her husband, Doug, of 47 years. I am really excited to have Anna here on the show, this award-winning author. Oh. And, you know, this is her book, Hattie, which we'll tell you more about while we're talking. But thank you so much for coming in.
Oh, thank you for inviting me,
and
Angela.
Congratulations on finishing your MFA.
Finally.
That was a big thing. I want to ask you a little bit about that. Like, what made you go back to get your MFA in creative nonfiction, especially after you're writing already?
I had always had a goal to get my MFA in writing sometime in my 50s. Well, almost 20 years later, I'm finally doing it. And what I wanted to learn was some of the techniques in nonfiction and creative nonfiction writing, memoir, because Hattie is a novel and it's about another woman's life. Mm-hmm. And I thought I've written many stories about my life, but how to edit them, how to have them flow. And interestingly, one of the things I decided during this MFA is the work I started doing was going to be written in the style of Hattie. Non-chronological, intuitively guided, and just simply written. Mm-hmm. You know, my prose is pretty simple language, but I think I get to the point with very descriptive scenes.
I would say characters. Your scenes are very descriptive. Hattie, you know, is a story about a woman, her life, kind of her memories, and you know, as reading it, I think, okay, if I was to write my own memories, it would be really nice to put it in this creative, fictional way. Do you know what I mean? Like, because you don't always want to give away your life story. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, the experiences that Hattie had are experiences that, well, some are experiences that a lot of people have, and some are very unique experiences that, you know, you're saying, how did she survive that? And, you know, she got through a really rough time having a husband who wasn't very loving, and, you know, and having these children. You know, I know I won't give the whole book away, but there was a child that had passed away. So, she suffered. And, you had to write those stories about Hattie. And I'm sure writing intuitively, and I know this process of intuitively writing, just allowing the muse to tell you the story, it can be very emotional.
I still cry at times when I read certain parts of Hattie because it is such a real connection. And oftentimes people would say to me, well, what era is it from? And why weren't you more detailed as to exactly where it was happening? And the reason for that was that I wanted it to be globally appealing to all women. Oh. And I've actually had quite a few male readers, which is great. And so I think Hattie addresses issues of being a mother, being a wife, being an abuse survivor, friendship, trauma, and
grieving quietly.
Grieving, yes, in silence.
I mean, silence.
And then finding her voice, and she found her voice in spirit.
Yeah.
Which to me was always a kind of a revelation, because when I worked in my 30s and 40s with survivors of childhood trauma, sexual trauma, I was always under this impression or belief that one really had to heal in this lifetime, and do everything you can. And I still think that's very important, and that's where writing comes in as a healing tool. But with Hattie, I realized that she found her healing in spirit, in the connection through spirit, and telling her story.
And telling her story to you.
Right,
and
right.
As I said in the beginning, sometimes
muse.
when you get that story, it just keeps coming and coming, and whether you're writing it on scrap pieces of paper or dictating it into the phone or actually outlining, when it's coming intuitively, it's kind of hard to outline, huh?
Well,
so you don't know where it's going.
It took 7 years, and it was about 4 years into the process of just journaling these stories, though I had a separate notebook for them, that I thought, gosh, this could be a book. But, the way you were talking about writing on little pieces of paper, I think that's one of the important things. If somebody at all has an inkling that they want to write, have a little book with you, a little journal or, blank page book with you, and a pen, and carry it everywhere, because there were times where I didn't listen to my own advice, and I would be in a little coffee shop in Northampton, and the muse would start, and I'd be writing on napkins. Paper napkins, paper plates, and I still have a few in my journals tucked away, which I'm sure you do.
I remember being at an office to get blood work done one time, and literally I'm like writing all over the paper, and I kept that because I was like, oh my gosh, this is the ending. That was the ending to April Rain, and I was waiting for it to come, and it does come out of order sometimes.
Oh, right. And
Hattie's a great example of, how you put things that are out of order in a really great order.
Right, but they're still out of order, and people will say that's where I think one has to trust their intuition and their writing style, because even with the thesis that I wrote, and it's just the part of a larger work, hopefully another book, is teachers and the teacher and classmates would say, well, that just kind of ended, and where is it going? They weren't necessarily comfortable with my writing style.
It's good. You leave a little hook at the end, so you want to come back and find out where it's happening.
It weaves back in, and I think that's the way you also write.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. And I had trouble in the beginning accepting that intuitive writing like that, because I was thinking, okay, memoir writers especially try to write chronologically, like time-wise. You're like, I was born, I lived, I did this, I died. It's like all in neat order. And stories in life aren't told that way. No. It doesn't happen that way. And when you're trying to relate it into a book, especially when you're telling someone else's story, you're getting the bits and pieces. I could say, oh, this is Anna. She went to school here and she had kids here. And I'm telling your life story out of order.
Right.
Instead of, oh, she, started writing poetry, and then she married her husband, and then she had children, and then she wrote a book. I mean, that's an interesting way of telling it, but it's like, well, I'm just saying what you know, who you are to me.
Well, one of the things, I'm sorry.
No, I want to say, and you did start writing poetry. That's how you got into writing?
Yes. I started as a poet, and I think what was helpful was I was working full-time as a nurse, newly married, taking care of a home, and whenever I wanted to express something, it was a good way to do it. Brief words, brief language. I don't even think I thought, I'm going to write a poem, but it ended up being a poem. And then, of course, it grew. But one of the things I wanted to say is that I learned in the MFA and the creative nonfiction and memoir writing is that, and I love this, memoirs are about a portion of life.
Yeah, a little snapshot.
Rather than, some writers may say, I want to write a memoir, but it's going to be like an autobiography, or a biography. And no, it's not that. Yeah. It's really take a snippet of your life, be it, you could write about motherhood, you could write about...
Well, My Dear Baby, Get Out, it's the snippet of 1 week of pregnancy.
Right.
Like that's it. It's my memoir of that 1 week of pregnancy, and it really does consolidate it. So, yeah.
And I was listening to one of your interviews, and my gosh, when you wrote 300 pages about your travel, and was it Italy?
In Italy.
And I'm like, this woman writes.
I didn't know the meanings of like binge writing or plotting or outlining until I started like taking classes and things. And then I realized, wow, sometimes I really do binge write, because when I sit down, that story just keeps coming and coming and coming. And it's like, okay, I want to write this down. And, when I was flying home from Italy, it was a matter of like, I want to document everything I did. I don't want to forget it. So I just relived it on paper so that I can go back to,
I mean, that's wonderful. I was so inspired. It's never anything I would do. That's just not the way I write. And now I find myself writing more on the computer rather than handwriting, where everything, Hattie was all handwritten. My earlier pieces were all handwritten, and I don't know if it's aging or if it's just technology,
So I handwrote all of these also. What do you do with all the handwritten stuff?
Do you know I still have the original?
Yeah.
I had many printed out pages once I put it into text that I ended up throwing those out. Yeah. But I still have all the original handwritten.
Yeah, the ones that like when I would print a rough draft of like a chapter or something like that and edit it, I did take all of those and I started filling a laundry basket, and then I had a campfire and burned them. I was like, okay, let it go. These are, gone. But I couldn't do that with the journals, and I'm like, why am I keeping these?
Do you know I have I don't know if it's appropriate for the show, but I have a thought about the journals because I have so many hardcover journals, and my choice is when I pass to be cremated. And so I thought, I'll have all my journals cremated with me.
Oh.
And you know what? When my daughter said one day, Mom, what are you going to do with all your journals? And I said, that's my thought. And she said, oh, thank God. She didn't want the responsibility.
No, what do I do with these? Like, one time walking through the Dr. Seuss Museum, and they had some of his journals. And, and as a writer, it's nice to see that someone else goes through that process because you're like, okay, this is, normal. But it's like, oh, well, they're sitting there. What do you do with them? Especially because if there's some stories that we don't publish that are in there that you think, that could be good.
I'm talking about personal journals.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about my writer journals because they're actually all combined. There are many of my journals that have stories that I would write in there and think, I will incorporate these into my memoir.
I'll do that. I will have my little file and just kind of like put it in the pigeonhole file, and say, okay, that could go in that story, I guess. We'll just leave it and let it sit for a little while and simmer on the stove. So you're still writing poetry?
I do, and not as frequently as I used to, but I do still write poetry, and I plan to incorporate some of it into the I don't know if I should call it a memoir. I guess it will be a memoir, but it will be written in a
And that's what
unique
you're working
style.
on now, maybe?
Yes,
as a
that
memoir?
was part of my thesis.
Oh.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that was I was texting you and we were trying to coordinate a date to come on the show, and I felt bad because I knew I was, you wanted to do this, but it was very overwhelming doing the thesis and everything to get it all done. So now you have that off of your shoulders, and you can move on and move on to your new works and things. So let's go back to Hattie. So when you were writing Hattie, and we know that you were intuitively writing this, so you were sitting down and just letting the pen flow, you had to edit it, like after you let that pen flow. So when you had all these chapters or, all these papers written, maybe not organized into chapters, what was that process like?
Okay, the editing of Hattie didn't happen until it was completely, when I knew it was done. And that was 7 years worth of stories.
Wow.
And pretty much the way Hattie presents, except for maybe 1 or 2 short stories or snippets that I have in the book, it is written in the order that it came.
Okay.
The editing happened more after I printed everything out, put it in, typed it up into the computer, and I started with a couple of author friends, writer friends who I knew were very good in their getting feedback. And then I had started sending it out early on, like let's say within 2-3 years of my typing it all out, I started querying agents, and it really didn't go in. I got a lot of good feedback, but nobody was interested. Now, Hattie was written 20 to 25 years before it was published. So
you and I have similar stories like that, because Angel's Journey was kind of the same way. I mean, that was written almost 15 years before I published.
And one of the things that I realized is I was using techniques such as non-chronological, such as titling chapters and splitting the book in 3 sections that were not used back then. And I think it maybe that's what turned some of the agents off, or lowered the interest. So then I just said, you know what? I'm just going to put it away. And I put it away until I joined the International Women's Writing Guild. And I would read from that at every summer conference, read a story. And I had so much interest and encouragement. You have to publish this book.
Yes.
So then I started working on it again. And I had a publisher out of Seattle that was going to do the book. And then because of something financial happening with the business, it didn't work out. And so here I am working with a graphic artist on the format and choosing a cover, and that deal falls through. And so I sought out a local publisher, Small Batch Books.
Oh, yes.
The editing process, they put it through because they wanted to make sure it was a quality work that they would publish, because I think of Hattie as a literary novel, and I wanted it to be in that category. And they put it through numerous editors, but I still had the last word.
That's
I had several people saying, take the snippets out. They don't work. And I said, no, they're staying in, There was little sections that were edited, but for the most part, Hattie
is how you wrote it.
Is how it was written.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate to have people that heard my voice and didn't want to change my voice or the cadence and the lyrical quality of
I think that's
the
what's
book.
important about writers being in workshop groups. Whether you go to a workshop or you belong to a writing club, or to be able to bring your work in and to read it, because even when you're reading it out loud to yourself, it's not the same. No. And I mean, for myself, like I belong to the Springfield Museum Creative Writers, so bringing a piece in and like reading it there, or another writing group, just getting that feedback of what was her name? Oh, I didn't say it. It's like like you as the author, like I feel like I've said her name so many times, but in this one little snippet that I'm reading, it didn't come out. And it's just interesting that that feedback really helps make the story better.
Absolutely. I think being in a community, if one is a writer, being in a community of other writers is very important, whether it's online, through Zoom, or I love in person.
Yeah.
When you did the book club for Hattie, which is how we kind of met.
Yes.
That was so wonderful to get that feedback from a large group of women.
I think I stumbled upon Hattie, or maybe someone introduced it to me. I don't really remember, but I read it, loved the story. I run a book club, so the ladies of Little Alum, we all read the book, and we invited you to our book club. And that was, I think, one of the first times I reached out to you, realized you were in the area, from finding that out, and then finding out we both belong to the International Women's Writers Guild. So, the universe just kind of lets you meet who you're supposed to be.
Yes.
And I know you coming to the book club that I'm part of wasn't your first time coming to a book club.
No.
And, writers who write for people who can be in a book club to discuss the book, there's a lot to be discussed with Hattie. What is it like as an author going to these book clubs and,
I love it.
listening to your readers say, why did you do this? Or,
I was fortunate enough to have my book signing at the Odyssey.
Oh.
And it was very,
and the Odyssey
very
is a bookstore
in South Hadley. Yes. Long-term independent bookstore. And it was very, very well attended. And then I had set up a website because I thought that would be a good way. And started getting calls from local people. I think a woman in Chicopee was the first. I can't remember her name now. She called me and she said, "We have a book club. Would you come?" Of course, I was nervous, and I didn't know what they were going to expect of me. First of all, they had wine and food.
It's always fun to get together for
always
appetizers.
Wonderful. As I would say, most
very
of
casual,
the book club,
informal.
Casual, informal, very conversational, which is, I think, what Hattie inspires.
Yes.
And I think so many people, readers, say that Hattie became a friend.
Oh.
And I think in book clubs, that makes a difference in the way people can talk. It's like you're all sitting there with Hattie.
Yes.
And discussing specific lines or specific stories, what was joyful, what was filled with despair, what made you cry.
Yeah.
What
was surprising.
Mm-hmm. So attending a book club is, to me, an honor, a high honor to be able to share with readers, to see how they're moved by my writing.
I mean, it's much different than when you're doing a book talk at the library, because you're not talking about your book when you go to these book clubs. Everyone knows the story. So now you're talking about the story itself.
The
and
story,
the characters.
how it interacts with the readers. You're right. It's not just standing up there and saying this is what the book is about. It's seeing how it impacted the reader, inspired the reader. And that's one of my goals in writing, is to touch readers on a, not just a heart level or a mind level, but on a soul level. And to wake people, I think some of my writing wakes people up and makes them think about things that maybe they don't want to think about.
I can
as
see that.
I'm sure with
definitely. Even writing, my stories, especially
writing.
with, An Angel's Journey. I mean, this was a muse who came to me, and, in that spiritual form, when you're having that intuitive writing about someone else, you do pull from your own experiences, but you're learning about a whole nother person, and giving that person, that spirit, a voice who doesn't have the voice anymore, whether they need to share their story for a healing purpose or share their story to allow other people to heal.
Right.
Because as much as Hattie shares her story for herself to heal, she heals others who are reading it. So it's really, writing is very powerful.
It is.
I really love that. Well, where can we find your book? Tell them where we can find the book.
Hattie is available on Amazon.
Okay.
It's also available through me.
Okay.
And I live locally.
Okay.
So I can always mail out copies. And the Odyssey in South Hadley has some copies.
And to contact you directly, they go through your website?
The website, yes, or...
Anna Bozena Bowen?
Right, Anna Bozena.
All right, Bozena.
HannaBozenaBowen.com
Yes.
is my website.
Okay.
And I'm hoping to redo it in the future, but for now it is what it is. You know, it's focused
I think
on,
we all
it's
we all
focused
do
on
that.
Hattie and me as a writer. And yes.
Yeah.
And some libraries carry it also,
Okay.
especially locally.
Okay, yeah, and I mean that's something I'll share with people who want to be authors. It's you do have to get that website platform, but sometimes it's time consuming to update it all the time because you want to focus on your writing,
Right.
and then you're getting caught up in the technical things of.
I think
of
a
it.
simple, you know, mine isn't as simple. I had it designed years ago
Yeah.
when Hattie was published. But doing something through WordPress or even Facebook, having a platform
Yes.
on Facebook, or I think that's effective as long as you can connect readers to your work.
And this show is available on Facebook at yWrite. We also are live on YouTube, so you certainly can watch this episode and all the other past episodes and the upcoming episodes of yWrite at yWrite with Angela Grout on YouTube. And I want to thank Anna so much for coming in today. Thank you for sharing Hattie with me. I hope the audience will be getting the book to read it so that Hattie can become your friend too. It's a beautiful read, and as you read this, if you want to be a writer, it's going to give you some great examples of how to start writing. So with that, I want to thank Studio 954 for letting us have this show here. I want to thank you, especially our audience at home. Thank you so much for tuning into yWrite so that this program can be available to you for all these really great conversations that we're having. We, again, are on YouTube, so please check us out and subscribe to us. We'll put the link down below. I just always wanted to say that, and I haven't. And at this part of the show, I like to give our audience a prompt. So, pick up your pen and, like I say each week, pick up your pen, set a timer maybe for 10 or 20 minutes, depending how much time you have. And we're going to start writing. And I'm going to give you a special prompt today that is going to kind of, get you writing. And the prompt is, let's start thinking about this. Today, I was visiting with this woman and she was so happy to see me. And she was telling me about, and just start writing. What is that woman telling you about? Because right there may be the muse that has a story to tell just to you, and we want to hear it. So thanks for tuning in to yWrite. I'm your host, Angela Grout, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you.